Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Back of the Envelope. And today we're talking about survival gardens. What is a survival garden? Well, I want to answer the question, how much space would it take to feed one person for a whole year, just by growing food? So this is obviously a very complex and complicated problem. So I'm going to do some significant simplifications here to make it possible to kind of to answer this question. Now, we're not going to answer it perfectly. This is kind of a ballpark order of magnitude type of answer I think that we're going to come up with. But it should be pretty interesting to see where the numbers come out. And of course, you know, this show is called Back of the Envelope, so that's kind of the hopefully the kind of calculations you were expecting. So my first step was to pick a calorie amount. How many calories does a person need in a year? And I chose 2,000 calories per day as an average, and I think the true average is maybe a little bit lower now for the recommendations, but 2,000 is a nice, easy number, and it's close enough to the true values. Probably that we're not going to come out too far away. So start with that and multiply that out for a year, and we get 730,000 calories per year. So if we're going to try and grow in a garden 730,000 calories in a year, in a growing season, what is it that we should grow to get those calories? And to help answer that question, I went to the, I believe this is the, let me just check my notes here. Yeah, so the Department of Agriculture recommendations now for diet. They've replaced the good old food pyramid that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with a new tool called MyPlate, and this happened in 2011, and now the official recommendation is to get rid of the food pyramid entirely and go by this MyPlate system. And what MyPlate says, it takes it's kind of a nice visual. It gives a plate and it divides it into 4 sections, so you can visually see how much of your plate should be these various food groups. But in any case, their recommendation is 30% grain, 30% vegetable, 20% fruit, and 20% protein. And dairy, they say, should be negligible. Now, this is from a government source, so there's no doubt some politics involved in how those numbers were come up with. So that could be a source of error. It's also talking about a plate, so it's more talking about a percentage by volume than a percentage by calorie content. So that's another source of error, because how I'm going to use this is essentially divvy up my total calorie needs by these percentages. So that's another thing to keep in mind that may affect our end results. But in any case, I took those percentages, I applied it to our calorie counts, and that means that we need, out of our 2,000 calories per day, 600 calories from grain, 600 from vegetables, 400 from fruit, and 400 from protein. And then we can calculate that out per year, and we get 219,000 calories per year for grain and vegetables, 146,000 calories per year for fruit and protein. Okay, so our next step then is to figure out what kind of crops are we going to grow to satisfy each of these 4 categories. And I picked 4 things that are fairly easy to grow in a small scale environment, and that were somewhat easy to calculate numbers for. So what I chose was, for our grain, I chose wheat, which would be processed into flour, so you'd bake it as bread or things of that sort. For our vegetables, green beans. For our fruit, apples, and for our protein, I chose eggs. Now, of course, in a real diet, if you were going to do this in reality, choosing only those 4 food items would not result in a healthy diet. I have no doubt that if you could grow these quantities of food, you would survive. You would not starve to death, but it's not a good mix of dietary of your dietary requirements, right? You'd probably want a mixture of fruits, a mixture of vegetables. Your grain probably doesn't matter too much because all grains are pretty much the same. They're just starch. Although they're, grains do vary a little bit in, vitamin content, but other than straight up sugar, grains don't provide much. So that one's probably okay. And then eggs, this one is probably the most problematic of our 4 choices. It's pretty easy to calculate, but eggs are pretty easy to get on a small scale, in a hobby farm or a garden. Chickens are very easy to keep. Even in the city, there's quite a lot of people who keep chickens. So that's part of the reason that I chose eggs for this calculation. However, eggs have an enormous cholesterol content and fat content. So the amount of eggs that we need to get to satisfy our protein requirement means our cholesterol and fat content is way through the roof. And of course, I'm not taking into account that the green beans probably have a little bit of protein in it, and if we mix some other vegetable matter, we may be able to take care of that protein requirement with far fewer eggs, or maybe no animal products whatsoever. So that's also going to affect our end result. So keep that in mind. So in any case, let's start with the wheat. And for wheat, I looked up some numbers, and I believe I didn't jot down where I got these from, but I did kind of a survey of internet sources, and they all agreed pretty darn close, so I feel confident in these numbers. But grain gets you about 50 bushels, wheat specifically, 50 bushels per acre. That's 60 pounds of wheat berries per bushel. And wheat berries, when you grind them up, just turn into whole wheat flour. So you get 60 pounds of whole wheat flour per bushel as well. And then 95 calories per ounce of whole wheat flour. Now my calorie numbers, I'll tell you where I got those actually, because I do have that recorded. That is right here. I went to nutritiondata.self.com. And there's a big database here with all kinds of different foods, and they give you a calorie number. And I did kind of double check with a few other sources, and they seem to agree, so I'm pretty confident of those as well. So we've got our data for wheat, so then we just need to do a calculation. And by the way, at the end of this video, I'm going to put these calculations up on the screen for a few seconds so you can pause and look at them. I will also paste them in the description, but I'm not sure how the formatting of that's going to work. It might be kind of hard to follow, so I will put them up on the screen as well. But so for wheat, we take our 219,000 calories per year. We multiply that by 1 ounce per 95 calories, times 1 pound per 16 ounces, times 1 bushel per 16 pounds, and times 1 acre per 50 bushels. And we come out to 0.05 acres. That's about 2,000 square feet, and that, for reference, is a square about 45 feet per side. So let's jump to our green beans then. The numbers I got for that were, and these came from, I think I did write this one down. Yeah, I found a report from University of California, Davis, from 2005, and that's where I got these numbers for green beans. They said you can get about 10,200 pounds per acre of green beans, and you get about 10 calories per ounce. So we do our calculation. We have 219,000 calories per year times 1 ounce per 10 calories times 1 pound per 16 ounces times 1 acre per 10,200 pounds, and we come out with 0.13 acres, which is about 5,600 square feet. which for reference is a square about 75 feet on a side. So we're getting the same amount of calories from our whole wheat and our green beans, but you'll notice the wheat only took 0.05 acres and the green beans took 0.13 acres. So there is definitely a difference in food density per acre, despite the calorie count being the same. And it's also interesting to note that the wheat is 95 calories per ounce, the green beans are 10 calories per ounce. So the wheat also has a much higher density of calories per pound or per ounce of food, as well as being fairly densely packed in space. So let's move on to our fruit. So our data for apples, now I got this data from a University of Illinois Extension report, and they said that you can get about 20 bushels per year per tree of apples, and there's about 42 pounds per bushel, and you can get about 50 trees per acre. Now I think this is kind of a medium-sized tree. Large trees, obviously, you get less per acre, but little dwarf trees, you can get quite a few more per acre. In terms of a survival garden, it's really kind of up in the air as to what type of tree you would be growing, whether you'd be tending it as if, as one would in a commercial orchard, keeping them pruned and small and easily harvested or not. So that's another wobbly area in our calculations, so keep that in mind. So we do our calculation. We get 146,000 calories per year times 1 ounce per 1 ounce per 15 calories. Sorry, 1 pound per 16 ounces times 1 bushel per 42 pounds times 1 tree per 20 bushels times 1 acre per 50 trees, and we come out with 0.015 acres or 653 square feet. For reference, that's a square about 25 feet on a side, which is roughly the amount of space for a single apple tree. So a single apple tree would provide enough fruit for one person for a whole year. Another note to say here, we're also assuming that you get your entire harvest and then you're able to eat that for the following year. So we do have to assume that there's some preservation going on, right? That you're storing your apples somewhere where they're not going to go bad. You're grinding your wheat berries and making flour and then storing that so it's not going to go bad and using it over time. And same thing with the green beans, whether you're canning them or freezing them or something. So let's jump to our protein then, our eggs. So I'm using 1 egg per hen per day. Now, in reality, this is a little bit less. I think on average, hens lay, like 6 eggs a week or somewhere around there. So it's a little bit less than what I've said here, but it's really not going to affect our numbers really at all, as you'll see in a moment. So for simplicity's sake, I'm just saying 1 egg per hen per day. 50 grams per egg. And this is kind of like a average sized large egg like you get in the grocery store. 155 calories per 100 grams. So we do our calculation. 146,000 calories per year is the requirement, times 100 grams per 155 calories, times 1 egg per 50 grams, times 1 hen per day per egg. 1 hen day per egg, times 1 year per 365 days, times 4 square feet per hen, times 1 acre per 43,560 square feet. And I'll note here, I didn't mention, I found a few numbers online of space requirements for chickens. And I think 4 square feet per chicken is about right. And I think that's like coop space. Now, chickens in the survival garden scenario, your chickens could very well be just free range in the rest of your garden, right? And if you had the area fenced in, they couldn't get away and provide just a small area. In this case, 4 square feet per hen for them to be laying. So as you can see, it really doesn't matter if it's 1 egg per hen per day or 0.9 eggs per hen per day. The square footage is so small that it's not going to affect our total really at all. So anyway, our result then for chickens is 0.0005 acres, or 20 square feet. And that's a square roughly about 4.5 feet per side. And that also comes out to about 5 hens that you'd be keeping. Now, like I said before, if you were eating 5 eggs per day, that would hit our appropriate calorie total, but your cholesterol would be way through the roof. I mean, nobody would eat 5 eggs a day and be healthy, so just keep that in mind. And like I said, this is meant to be an order of magnitude type of calculation. You know, what we're trying to find out is, would the survival garden be a square mile, or would the survival garden be something that could fit in an average person's backyard in the city? So I don't feel too bad about the egg thing. It is a little sloppy. Like I said, you could be a little more clever and get your protein from your vegetables, and skip the animal thing entirely. If you were going to get your protein from meat, for example, then our calculation gets a lot more complicated, because not only do we need space to keep the animals, we need to feed the animals quite a lot as well, and we need to butcher them, and it just gets a lot more complicated, both to actually do it in a survival garden setting and to calculate. Now, one thing I did not factor in here was feeding the chickens, although I did do a little comparison to try and figure out what that would be. I think for our wheat, for our survival garden for a year, I think we were producing about 150 pounds of whole wheat flour, roughly. And after doing a little bit of investigating, I think chickens require about 100 pounds of grain food per hen per year. So as you can see, you know, for 5 chickens, you'd need to provide 500 pounds of feed for the year. So you could grow your own grain, but that's going to drastically increase the amount of grain that we're going to have to plant. You know, maybe 5 times as much. So that's another factor to keep in mind that we really didn't include here, but you would have to if you were really doing this for real. But even if we multiplied our total grain area by 5, that would still be 0.2 acres instead of 0.05 acres. So the total amount of space is really still quite small. So anyway, let's actually get to our totals. So our total, with all that added up, is 0.2 acres, which is about 8,700 square feet, which is roughly a square 93 feet per side. So like I said, if you double that for our extra grain requirement for the chickens, we're still talking less than half an acre. So you could realistically feed one person for an entire year in a survival garden setting with less than an acre. And there are other methods that you could do to actually reduce that space requirement by a lot. For one thing, co-planting your crops. So there's a method called French intensive gardening, which essentially it plants companion plants together. So, if you had a plot of corn, say sweet corn growing, well, in between all the sweet corn plants, you'd be planting something else, like a legume, like green beans or peas or something. And not only do the plants share kind of a symbiotic relationship, legumes are nitrogen fixing, and corn is extremely nitrogen hungry, so they complement one another, but also they're growing actually in the same physical space. In urban settings these days, vertical gardening is becoming more popular, containerized, stackable gardens. So that obviously would be an interesting way to reduce footprint and grow more crops. so there's really a number of ways that this could go that could increase the efficiency of our whole survival garden idea. But in any case, what we're saying is that my initial calculation here, 0.2 acres, it's a little bit bigger than your standard urban city lot, but it's a little bit smaller than kind of your standard suburban plot, actual lot, I guess I should say. So what I want to show here is that a survival garden is actually quite feasible in urban settings with limited space, just in an order of magnitude type of way. You'd have to do some clever engineering and I think some clever planning about what crops you were going to do. Of course, you can also rotate crops. Some crops do really well in the early spring, some do well in the fall, some have a longer growing season, some have a shorter growing season, so you can keep that, take that into account as well. But so the end result, I guess, is that it's quite possible, and it takes very little space actually to feed one person. And with clever management, I think you could feed a household of people, say 2 to 5 people on a city plot, if you were kind of clever about it. Or you could at least supplement a diet significantly. You could take care of 30 to 50% of the calorie intake for your household for a year just out of your garden. So I kind of had a feeling at the beginning that this was where we were going to end up, that it would come out pretty close to what I was thinking, that a city lot would be sufficient for a person. And so I guess I wasn't really too surprised by the results. I guess I was a little surprised that a single apple tree would be sufficient. I was thinking that would be a few trees. So that was kind of interesting. The whole eggs thing is kind of a conundrum, as we talked about. But yeah, so I think the experiment worked out pretty well. Our calculations made sense. Came out close to what we were thinking, so that's a good check on our gut that we were thinking along the right lines. So I guess I don't really have anything else to say about this experiment. As I said, I'll throw up the calculations here in a minute, but if you have any questions or comments or suggestions about this video, please throw them in the comments. I will read them and respond. It's a very interesting topic, so I'd love to hear anybody else's perspective on this. If you did enjoy this video, please leave a comment, hit that like button. That's very helpful for me. Also, check out the other videos on my channel. I do some video game related stuff, some other interesting things as well. So if you see something you like there as well, please hit that subscribe button, and that would be wonderful as well. But in any case, I hope everybody has a great day, and that's it for Back of the Envelope this time, and I will see you next time.